Whether you like Nintendo or not, it's hard to deny that what they make is unique. I don't say that to mean strange or off-putting, though I'm sure a lot of people do feel that way. It's just that Nintendo has always strived to push forth not only original ideas within their games, but also innovative infrastructure on which new ideas can fully blossom. The Wii U gave us that and more, with traits that propel forward interesting new ways to play that simply aren't possible on other consoles. And although I am excited to see what the Switch has to offer, it is somewhat of a shame that it won't have the same level of potential asymmetry that the Wii U had. I wanted to make a video that's somewhat of an homage to the Wii U right before the Switch's release. This console seems to get a lot of flack, and while it did fall flat in a few ways, I think that dismissing it as a total failure is completely wrong. So many beautiful things were done on the Wii U that could have never happened on other consoles. Some of my favorites include the frenetic micromanagement of Game & Wario's Gamer and the affable couch play of Nintendo Land's Luigi's Ghost Mansion. I can make a huge list of things that the Wii U was capable of that no other console was. In fact, this entire video started out as being just that, but as I went on, I realized the bulk of what I had to say was about one game that my friends have probably been tired of hearing me talk about for the past few months: Affordable Space Adventures. This game is an absolute masterpiece in so many different ways, and it simply could not have been possible on other consoles, even the PC in my opinion. If you have a Wii U, you need it, and if you don't have a Wii U, you need to play it on a friend's, because I don't think any other game did as good a job capitalizing on the Wii U's strengths. Before I start talking about it, I just wanted to say that despite being anywhere between 1 and 3 players, I personally feel as though this game is best played with 2 players, so I'll be phrasing my review as if it were a 2-player game. So just keep that in mind going in. The game starts with an intro cutscene telling the players that being a space explorer is now more affordable than ever. A company called U Explore is providing people with cheap, accessible spaceships with which they can excavate the chimerical planet of Spectaculon. The planet is described as beautiful and uninhabited, meaning any place you find to your liking can be claimed as your own. Then, of course, they drive home just how safe this expedition is, which is the nail in the coffin of too good to be true. As if it wasn't obvious, it's all bunk and the planet is a horrifying mess. While writing this, I wanted to complain that it's a little cliche to tell us that everything is fine only for it to not be fine, but then I realized that it's actually a lot less common than I think it is. The only other example I can think of, at least an example of one that isn't at all politically focused, is Portal. With that said, it does remind me a little bit of Portal in its execution. I'm reminded of those Cave Johnson advertisements leading up to Portal 2's release. Still, I think it was done really well here because despite being something familiar, they managed to make it their own since the narrator here is far less eccentric than Cave Johnson was. Anyway, once the game starts, it's implied that your ship is the only one in a large group that didn't end up immediately breaking, so you literally start the game in a rainy graveyard. Something narrative juxtaposition, you get it, moving on. From here, your ship slowly boots up and you're able to start your adventure. One player is the ship's pilot who uses any controller that isn't the gamepad and looks at the TV to navigate the environment. The other player will spend a great deal of time looking at the TV, but also has access to the ship's settings on the gamepad. You start out with only a few options, but the ship is booting up throughout the course of the game, giving a narrative reason for the game's upgrade system. By the end of it, the sheer quantity of things you can do on this gamepad is breathtaking. Hours into it, you'll find yourself still getting new mechanics to play with, and the way they mingle with previously established mechanics allows for a cornucopia of methods to solve puzzles. These puzzles are mostly presented in the form of alien creatures that can detect sound, heat, and electricity. It's the engineer's job to toy with the gamepad settings to make sure that the ship can still fly while also able to not attract the alien's attention. For example, take a look at this puzzle right here. I scan this alien dude and the gamepad tells me it hates electricity. Now I'm using the electric engine, so I should probably switch to the fuel engine. But it looks like I'm still generating too much electricity. I see that that's coming from my stabilizer, so I can turn that down. But now I'm making too much sound. I can turn down my thrusters a little bit to remedy that, and now I can pass by undetected. I still have to be mindful though, because the ship is now very slow and not very stable, so the pilot has to be extra careful while moving. This is just one example of how puzzles are structured in this game. There's a whole lot more you'll need to keep track of later on, like the ship's temperature and how much friction the ship has with the ground. Plus, not every puzzle will give you the time to solve it like this one. Sometimes you'll need to think and act quickly and in sync with the other teammate. The pilot is going to be doing some tight weaving through obstacles, while the engineer is going to be swiftly changing settings to adapt to the immediate environment. Now, I'll admit I've never been in a spaceship on another planet before, but the way the gamepad displays information makes it all feel especially real. For example, when I said that the ship boots up at the beginning, I mean that literally. The gamepad screen looks like a computer turning on and makes startup sound effects. Additionally, later on, if the ship gets hit by enemies, the gamepad will give you static as if it was a real computer. Stuff like this punches immersion into the player. Speaking of immersion, the whole game's atmosphere is very Metroid. In fact, now that I think about it, this whole game is very Metroid. You've got these same dark and murky environments, you're all alone on an alien planet, and your ship keeps getting augmented with new mechanics as the game goes on. Even though this isn't a Metroid game, I feel like it does a good job at scratching the itch that the recent lack of titles in the series has left for fans. Okay, so take Portal's story, Metroid's aesthetic, and the gameplay of Well, nothing really. Nothing I've ever seen is played quite like this. While this is mostly because the Wii U gamepad was a little underutilized during its lifetime, I think it's also because co-op is kind of becoming endangered. Honestly, I can't think of very many recent co-op games that aren't also versus games. With this in mind, Affordable Space Adventures was even more of a delight than it already was, as it puts players in the same hectic atmosphere you see in games like Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, where you find one person messing up and jovially exchange disgruntled instructions before you two find yourself devolving into unintelligible screeches. But even when you're not yelling at each other, it sets the perfect environment for friends to make dumb jokes. For example, when stumped on a puzzle for a few minutes, I could always rely on my friend to stroke his chin before furtively stating,
"Man, this puzzle, it's just so affordable."
I only have two real issues with this game. For one thing, it starts out pretty slow, which can be really off-putting for the first like 20 or 30 minutes. But at the same time, I think it would have been hard to expect the player to get used to how the game controls so quickly, so I don't think this is an issue they could have solved. My other issue with the game is this puzzle right here. It's never taught in the game that you can free platforms by cutting laser flow, so when my friend and I spent 20 minutes running around this environment looking for anything to progress with, we were pretty disappointed to find that the answer is something we probably never would have thought of. Perhaps this puzzle was their way of trying to teach us that you can, in fact, cut the laser, but I can think of much better ways they could have done it. For example, if there was a closed-off section right here and a button down here, the players would naturally try to drop their platform through the laser onto the button. Having the platform go through the laser would free the other platform, organically teaching the player that this is possible, while the touching of the button could open a pathway for players to go back down and get both platforms. Now, I understand that this idea I have is a tad flawed too, because if the player misses the button upon dropping the platform, then they're stuck. But I think that could also be remedied, perhaps by making the button so large that it's literally impossible to miss. I don't know, these are just ideas. And I guess this is where I put the spoiler section. Now's the time to stop the video if you want to play it, but before you go, I just need to say, at the beginning of the game it asks you if you want to turn on Miiverse. Say yes. Anyway, if you have even one acquaintance with a Wii U, please do buy this game for them and play it with them. Once the Wii U inevitably becomes a rare console, which in my opinion is pretty likely, games like this will be a rarity, so don't just dismiss it thinking you can get to it some other day. Anyway, spoilers start now. I wanted to say this spoiler first on the off chance any of you decided to keep watching without having beaten the game. Affordable Space Adventures has easily one of the best endings to a story I've ever seen. I can't think of a single emotion that I didn't feel from it, which is funny because this game isn't by any means story-driven. I don't want to explain it, both because the context might take more time than I'm willing to summarize, and because perhaps me not saying it will incentivize you to play it for yourselves. Moreover, this ending will not pack the same punch if you just look it up online, so if you really want to look it up, at least watch an entire walkthrough. Now, I know that's a lot to ask, but it's really one of those things that requires a culmination of some kind, and reading it online will not do it justice. You have to experience the whole trek to really let it hit you as hard as it will, at least in my opinion. Others might disagree, but I mean, this is my review. That's not in the script, by the way. Anyway, back to the review, spoilers now. I'm very fond of how the game slows down near the end. Immediately after what I'd consider to be the climax of the game, your ship is spit out into a beautiful environment full of lush plant life. It's artistically sardonic how after going through the hellscape of puzzles and deadly alien creatures, you finally do get to explore exactly what was promised for you at the beginning of the game. It makes you wonder if You Explore really is a horrible company or not. It's twistedly funny after the hours of gameplay that precedes it, and it follows nicely into the very ending of the game, which again, I'm not going to spoil. Leading up to this point, your ship gets pretty beaten up, to the point at which it begins losing functions. For example, most people who played this game probably aren't very fond of the fuel engine since it takes longer to start up, makes a lot of sound, and leaves the ship very unstable. But there comes a point later on when you can't even use the electric engine, so players are forced to work with what they have to solve puzzles. I thought this was brilliant as it allowed the designers to create puzzles that simply can't be solved by normal means. You have to think outside the box, trying to do things you normally wouldn't do in order to keep progressing, which amplifies the thought-provoking nature the game already possessed. This damage to the ship doesn't only affect how it functions, but also how it looks. Later on in the game, the gamepad screen starts breaking. You'll just be playing when you'll suddenly hear a loud glass shattering. If you look down, you'll see little broken crevices in the screen. It adds another layer of immersion to the experience, especially in a co-op setting. It's not just something you see and think, oh, that's clever. It's more like the gamepad user will see it and then say, oh crap.
What's up?
The gamepad screen is breaking.
Oh, that's a really nice touch.
We're gonna die on this ship. Affordable Space Adventures is probably my favorite Wii U game. I could say it's a shame that it was released for a console that underperformed as much as the Wii U did, but I can say with certainty that it wouldn't have been nearly as effective on another console. Love it or hate it, the Wii U brought to the table a lot of novel concepts that I'm glad I got to play, such as Affordable Space Adventures. This game is definitely one you can't miss, with its Portal story, Metroid atmosphere, unique gameplay, and an ending that is so much better than the ending to this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna finally get back to doing What's With Games now. I just really wanted to review this game before the Switch released. If you want to watch my other review, check out this video on the King's Quest reboot. Or for something else, check out this What's With Games episode right there. And don't forget to subscribe and all that.